The chance to secure a livable future for everyone on Earth is slipping away. This is an alarming message from the United Nations' latest report on climate change. Scientists believe that the deadly heat waves, floods, hurricanes and other weather extremes that are already happening now will become even more severe in the future if humanity does not act swiftly. This is Euronews Georgia, and it is climate change and its dire consequences we're talking about today with our colleagues from France, Bulgaria, Romania, Albania, Serbia and Georgia. And here we are joined by our colleagues Jeremy Wilkes from France, Lyon, Marijan Ion from Romania, George Karamfilov from Bulgaria, Franco Ergo from Euronews Albania, Bojan Brkic from Serbia, and David Kekenadze from our Tbilisi studio. Dear colleagues, thank you so much for joining us today. Until we start our conversation with our colleagues, I want to present a story from Romania about the climate change. A heat wave of up to 40 degrees Celsius hit Romania in the last several days, and it follows severe floods in a number of regions. Climate change has a serious socio-economic impact on the country, and that is felt especially in the agricultural sector. Euronews Romania reports.
Romania is experiencing full climate change effects, which caused floods in the urban areas of Brașov, Iași, and several other regions in the south of the country. 450 passengers were left stranded in 2 trains in Suceava County because the tracks were covered by water and trees. In just 24 hours, it rained as much as in the whole month of June. Even the Transfăgărășan road, which crosses the Carpathians, was blocked by silt from the mountain slopes. Meteorologists issued 18 bad weather warnings in a single day. After the heavy rains, a heat wave hit Romania, with temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius. However, in the urban areas, due to the sun hitting the asphalt, concrete and buildings, the temperatures felt were even higher and the thermal discomfort increased.
Schimbarea climatică pe care deja o simțim se amplifică și impacturile ei devin din ce în ce mai importante și, din păcate, ar putea să ne ducă în zone de negestionat dacă vom continua cu creșterea emisiilor în ritmul de acum și dacă nu reducem emisiile.
Seaside tourists have experienced an unusual phenomenon. Because of temperature differences between night and day, fog formed over the water.
Vorbim despre un fenomen spectaculos care nu se întâmplă foarte des la malul mării și ceea ce este și mai inedit este imaginea din apa mării. După cum vedeți, vizibilitatea este extrem de scăzută, iar turiștii care sunt în apă sunt învăluiți de un strat de ceață.
Another effect of climate change is severe drought, which affects the agricultural sector. In Moldova, for example, farmers faced high losses of wheat crops in recent years. To help them, specialists at the University of Life Sciences in Iași are trying to find a wheat variety suitable for the area.
Rezultatele, cel puțin la nivel vizual, sunt deocamdată foarte promițătoare. Există forme biologice care sunt tolerante și la stresurile climatice și la stresurile fitopatogene.
Climate change is causing desertification on the long run. More than a third of the country's arable land is at risk. In the region of Oltenia alone, more than 800,000 hectares will be affected.
Now Marijan Ion is joining us from Romania, and we will discuss this story with her. Marijan, 88% of Romanians think that climate change has an impact on their everyday lives. Could you please tell us how Romanians feel about the climate change and what are their perceptions about the crisis?
Hello, Nuka. Hello, everybody. Well, you have seen the images, and this is how the situation looks right now. This is a country that used to have a normal temperate climate. That means 4 regular seasons. Well, the reality right now is that we have more like a hot season and a cold season. The situation is such that we also have extreme weather episodes, and we have them more often than ever. And people can witness these episodes, they can feel the consequences. And the changes are happening really fast. That means during a person's lifetime, you can witness and feel these changes. Well, this might be a piece of good news because witnessing all these changes, people really understand the importance of climate change and the importance of tackling this issue. There were different local surveys done here, and they showed that, for instance, the Romanians started to believe recently, starting last year, that climate change has to do with human actions. They are triggered and emphasized by what we do every day. For instance, there is a recent research made by INSCOP Institute, which shows that right now, like 70% of the Romanians believe that economic activity is really impacting the climate, and more than that, 79.5% of the Romanians believe that this country's climate has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. Well, the youngsters are really concerned here about the climate change, and even when they go out searching for a job, they look for companies that are environmentally friendly, and they have policies to tackle climate change and stop pollution. Also, you can see the public concern in the sales of the electric cars, because there are now in the roads of Romania like 10 times more electric cars than there were 3 years ago. And also, to add some salt and pepper to the end of this transmission, if you go on Google search for Romania, you will find that on the top of the searches there are a lot of issues like what is climate change, how do I stop pollution, and so on.
Thank you, Marijan, so much. Bulgaria is also heavily affected by climate change, as the summer has warmed by 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius in the country, and projected trends are not also hope-giving.
Това е пчеларската полза. Аз блестели слънчо гледите, окъпани от този дъжд.
And now Georgi Karamfilov will join us from Euronews Bulgaria. Georgi, scientists predict different scenarios of climate change effect on Bulgaria. Could you tell us what they predict for the country and how the state is coping with them?
Hello. To be honest, the predictions of the scientists about Bulgaria are already happening. The geographical position of our country has always been linked with continental climate, which means cold winter with a lot of snow, and after that, very hot summer. Now we have a mild winter. After that, a distinguished raining season, which is about May and June. There are a lot of floods in this raining season because the amount of water that falls is something that we have never seen in the recent years. After that, there is drought and the extreme heat that we're seeing right now. We see temperatures from about 40 to 45 degrees Celsius, which usually are on the southeast part of the country. Now there are on a lot more spaces and a lot more cities which are not prepared for such occasions. So in those cities where the heat is extremely heavy, there are logistics created, so water should be supplied to the public. Of course, there are some cases in which the state or the municipalities fail in these attempts. We have cases in which people do not receive bottled water simply because the mayor of the city is on break, which, as we know, is not something that we should see happening. What is important, however, is that the climate change is obvious for everybody in Bulgaria. The heat is really extreme, and also just yesterday we had a very strong thunderstorm with very heavy wind, which will be followed by again a season of a series of days with heat, and after that thunderstorms again. So we all see that, but the problem is that we do not have the necessary education for the people to realize that this is a result of climate change. We're doing packages every day showing the people the severe heat and asking them about their opinion. They're not happy about it, but what we see is that they do not understand the reasons behind it. So this is something that the state should really do more about. Also, I should focus on the floods because the rivers are overflowing rapidly. We saw very severe floods last year, which destroyed hundreds of houses. This year, it happened again. The rivers are very dirty. They have not been cleaned for years, and when the rain falls, the massive rain falls, I mean, they overflow very easily, and that's why the floods are so severe, and that's why people are left without their homes for days, for weeks, and sometimes for months. So this is also something the state should focus on, but mainly the education, because when we talk about climate change and when we talk about the temperatures here in Bulgaria, we never say what are the reasons behind it, and this is something that we should really try to work better on.
Thank you, Georgi, so much. And my next one question goes to Jeremy Wilkes, who is joining us from France, Lyon. He's Euronews science journalist. Jeremy, what we have seen and what we've heard is that the impacts of climate change are on global landscape and unprecedented in scale. What are the emerging effects of climate change the humanity is facing now?
I think you can already hear from our correspondents there that everybody in Europe is very much aware of the effect of climate change where they live, but there are actually emerging effects in areas that people don't visit very often. For example, the cryosphere, so the icy areas of the planet. There, if we take the example of the European Alps, there last year, the European Alps lost the equivalent of a block of ice 5 square kilometers in size, a huge amount of ice that disappeared because of the heat waves and the lack of snow precipitation during the winter time. The same thing seems to be happening again this year. Swiss glaciologists saying goodbye to glaciers in parts of the country, saving samples in the freezer if they can. If we go to Antarctica, there in June, that continent around the edge is sea ice, and last month we were seriously missing a lot of sea ice. There were 2.3 million square kilometers less sea ice than average for the time of year, 17% below average, so really rather unprecedented. And in Greenland, there the melt is ongoing. We had rain there for the first time on the peak of the Greenland ice sheet a couple of years ago, but we continue to have very heavy rain, which is accelerating the melt, which is most contributing to sea level rise. And of course, the meltwater goes down into the cracks in Greenland and it continues to kind of destabilize the ice sheet. The other big trend that we've seen is the way that the oceans are warming up. Now, the oceans absorb about 90% of the excess heat in the atmosphere because of greenhouse gases, and we've seen an increasing number of marine heat waves. The Mediterranean suffered marine heat waves last year, and the same's happening again this year. But also, for the first time, we've seen a major marine heat wave across the northeast Atlantic, across the coast of the UK and Ireland, all the way down to the Canaries. And that has a long-term impact on the species that live there, because the temperatures are up to 5 degrees above average for the time of year. And the species there won't be able to reproduce necessarily in the same way. Their habitats might be damaged, and there'll be long-term effects from those unprecedented changes that we see going on in these areas that I say that most of us don't visit very often, but climate change is hitting them hard too.
That sounds very alarming, Jeremy. Thank you so much. And Albania is one of the most affected countries in Europe by climate change. Temperature rise there is more than average now. Let's see what are the major effects of the climate change on the country, and then we'll come back with Franco Egro, who is joining us from Tirana.
Albania is one of the most affected countries in the region by climate change. Experts at the Institute of Geosciences state that the consequences of global warming are becoming increasingly evident.
According to our monitoring, we have observed a decrease in rainfall by 13%. And if we consider the number of rainy days, there is a decrease of 18% compared to the 30-year average. The effects are perceived more in our country because while the global average temperature increase is 1.1 degrees, it is 2 degrees here, making us more vulnerable to extreme weather events resulting from these climate changes.
Climate change is causing negative consequences in several areas. Agriculture is the most affected sector due to extreme weather events. Fuat, a farmer from Korça, a city in southeastern Albania, expresses uncertainty about crop cultivation.
We are experiencing climate change. Seasons are changing from year to year. Damages are significant. Storms, hailstorms and floods last year completely destroyed 44 hectares of my wheat crops. It is becoming more difficult. We are no longer certain about the seasons and the crops we can cultivate to adapt to the conditions.
In the past 2 years, Albania has increased investments in early prediction of extreme events.
By giving it more attention, we have managed to make earlier predictions for these phenomena and take timely measures to minimize damages and their consequences.
Erosion, another phenomenon of climate change, is posing a threat to Albanian land. According to a recent World Bank report, some 20% of the land in Albania is at high risk of erosion.
And Franco Egro is joining us from Tirana. Franco, in this story we heard that the temperature rise is in Albania more than average. What makes your country so climate vulnerable?
A very warm greeting, Nuka, from a very hot Tirana. As it is known, Albania is a small country where the main economy is services, some industry and agriculture. There are many challenges in addressing the climate change's risks. Actually, the main problems are heavy floods and landslides. The weather is changing, bringing an increase in temperatures, extreme weather, floods, draft waves, rainfalls, etc. According to the World Bank report of 2021, the coastal areas where the majority of population is located is highly vulnerable. The agriculture, energy sector and water resources are particularly at risk. Albania is also vulnerable to fluctuations in precipitation with very negative implications for country's hydropower supply. I should note, Nuka, that Albania is severely hit by coastal erosion. Almost a third of Albania's 427-kilometer coastline is being eroded by violent waves. And this process is accelerating at an alarming speed due to climate-induced storm surges and rising sea levels. In its attempts to fulfill its EU obligations, in June last year, the Albanian authorities committed to decreasing total emissions by 21% by 2030 compared to the baseline through improvement in energy efficiency in transport and residential units, and increase in the use of renewable energy and the penetration of natural gas. Albania was recently in the news, and I am sure you have heard about it, because of the Vjosa, a river in the south of the country. It is one of the last wild rivers of Europe and was declared a national park by the Albanian government, becoming the very first wild river national park in Europe. Nonetheless, Nuka, apart from this reality, if you have not decided yet where to spend your summer holidays, I would suggest to you to come to Albania, as it is cooler along the beaches, and as the unprecedented wave of foreign tourists have confirmed so far, they're having a great time.
Thank you, Franco. Thank you for invitation. Yeah, really great idea. And climate alarms are becoming more and more frequent in Serbia. Extreme weather is becoming more recent in the country lately, and the impacts of climate change is alarmingly evident, leaving farmers in a state of uncertainty and despair. Euronews Serbia is reporting.
A ona više ne može da je primi uopšte sloj zemlje zato što je visoka i podzemlja. Znači ovo više nije... Apsolutni ekstremi što se tiče i suše i količine vode odjednom, da verujte nam je apsolutno nije jasno šta se dešava.
Do pre mjesec dana ovdje su nicali kukuruz i soja. Potom su usledile obilne kiše, formirano je jezero, usevi su propali. I tu nije kraj mukama poljoprivrednih proizvođača. Nakon poplava sledi suša.
Apsolutno počinjem da gubim volju. Pazite, prvenstveno sam radio zemlju jer uživam u tome, volim, družimo se svi, proizvodimo nešto jako je lepo svojom rukom proizvesti, uostalom hraniti bakar svoje selo ili svoju porodicu. Ali kad se to sve skupi u jedno, verujte mi da mi dođe preko glave, da batalim sve.
Na primjera radi, prethodnih 10 godina imali smo 3 toplotna talasa u toku godine, sada već imamo 5, zatim količina od 50 litara po metru kvadratnom koja je uglavnom bila rezervisana za ceo jun ili jul, sada to u proseku padne za 12 sati.
Jesi mogao tačno da znaš šta god da poseješ imaćeš neki novac. Tad su bile i cene ujednačene, naravno rast ili pad nekoliko procenata, isto tako je bilo i sa padavinama. I evo lično ja sam do sad samo sejao svoju kukuruz, ove godine imam i suncokret i šećernu repu, pšenicu, soju, kukuruz, više ne znam nija, verujte mi, pokušavam sve kombinacije moguće jer više ništa nije sigurno. A izgleda da nijedna od tih kultura neće proći dobro.
Ja sam premačene u sve. Moji su tamo preci nekad imali sada, izmili pisače i čene, pa nisam teo da prodam zemlju, on nije teo zemlju da uzmem na procenat, i teo pare onda se ne vidi. Ja njemu dam pare na ruke i doviđenja.
And Bojan Prkic from Euronews Serbia is here with us. Bojan, we have seen how climate change is affecting agriculture, and not only agriculture in Serbia. What are the efforts of your country to adapt the new reality?
There's a very vigorous debate in Serbia about what should we do in order to survive all these extreme weather conditions. Those conditions are similar to what all of my colleagues have previously described. We had a very warm winter, then heavy snow at the end of April, which damaged the fruit, and then a heat wave, which is now interrupted by monstrous electric storms and hail. So last year, when we we had excessive drought and a lot of bodies of water dried out, the debate started about, are we doing enough to mitigate the effects of all these extreme weather conditions? Are we preserving enough of drinking water? Do we care for our rivers and so on? In May and June, there were heavy rains in Serbia, and in more than 130 places around the country there were flash floods, which destroyed homes and crops. And it turned out that the local communities were not cleaning the riverbeds. So are we cleaning the riverbeds? Well, the answer is always almost universally negative. We are not cleaning the rivers. We are not saving drinking waters in reservoirs sufficiently. In agricultural sector, there were some serious donations or grants from the European Union for irrigation, and they are slowly being implemented, but all too slowly. The anti-hail nets have not been installed in most of the agricultural land, so there's a lot to do. The action is quite sluggish, but the good news is that there is a very vigorous debate. There is awareness of the people that something should be done, because whatever the causes of the global warming, and of course, like in all the other issues, the Serbs are divided in their opinion as to what causes the global warming, but they all admit that it's coming, and the severe weather is coming, and that something should be done, and they're demanding more and more from the government to take more decisive and quicker action, and this is the good news.
It was Bojan Brkic from Serbia, and now in Georgia. In Georgia, glaciers are melting and retreating. The highest peaks of Caucasus may never look the same again as years ago. Specialists fear that consequences of climate change will be more drastic in upcoming years.
This is Georgia, Svaneti, home to Shkhara, the highest peak of the Caucasus. Previously, surrounding mountains used to be covered with snow all year round. Now, locals say nature is changing in front of their eyes. Glaciers are melting and retreating. Sometimes they split or disappear completely. Those narrow paths lead to one of them, Chaladi Glacier. Mountain climber and guide Misham Jedliani has been here many times during his 20-year career.
Debris that you can see here was left by the retreating glacier. When ice melts, it leaves certain types of rocks. We call it moraine. Long time has passed since the area was glaciated. Here now you can find the grass and trees, but you can still tell that the glacier used to cover this area before.
According to studies, this glacier is retreating by 20 meters annually. Average retreat rate for other glaciers on the Caucasus is 10 to 15 meters annually. Shalva Guledani and his wife, Nargiz Nigurian, have spent their whole lives here. They say that the environment is changing. Soil is less fertile now, and mountain springs have stopped flowing.
Lots of springs are lost now. One of them was Palo Spring. Its water was ice cold. When pouring into the cup, it would form icicles. Now we have made an artificial channel, and that's where we get our water. But the main natural springs supplying this village are now gone.
Scientists believe unless we take drastic action, all the mountain glaciers might be gone by 2100.
According to the latest studies, from 1960 to 2016, glaciers have lost 600 million gigatons of ice. To make it easier to visualize, this amount of ice, for example, would cover Chile with a 15-meter high ice. This is huge.
Back to Svaneti, they fear that in upcoming decades, consequences of climate change will become more drastic, and their grandchildren might never again see the glacier in the glorious way the world knows it today.
And one of the authors of this package is joining us from our Tbilisi studio, David Kekenadze. David, we've seen very sad pictures, and I want to ask you, is this process irreversible, and are there any solutions that can be applied to slow down it?
Well, climate change is a really multifaceted problem, and that makes it much more challenging to solve. There are solutions, but it might not be what you think it is. Let me start by the first part of your question, whether the process is reversible, the ice melt. But what is certain is that we can indeed slow down the process, but slowing down the process will be a big deal. It's a no small feat, and it will be a great accomplishment. When we talk about climate change, what it all comes down to is the reducing global emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, the gases that trap heat in our atmosphere and which makes the planet warmer. Personally, for me, the huge obstacle and problem is that the climate change knows no borders. For example, you have the glacier melting in Georgia, but not necessarily because of the emissions by Georgia, but rather the worldwide emissions. So you cannot solve this problem single-handedly. This requires, I would say, the unprecedented coordination of a global scale. And this situation creates a case when you have a problem here locally, but you can only solve it with the global approach. To put it simply, the big goal and the solution itself is to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And according to UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the limiting global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius can save us from the most severe consequences of climate change. And we should not underestimate how big of a difference this can make. We are talking about possibly saving trillions of dollars, as well as it will give us all kinds of benefits when it comes to welfare or health and etc. So I mentioned that solving the climate change requires a global approach, right? But what does this exactly mean? This means, for example, reducing emissions and moving to more renewable sources of energy. This means protecting biodiversity and natural landscapes, as those are areas which can store a lot of carbon. It also means moving to a more circular or greener economy. It means switching to more sustainable farming and food production. It means building more efficiently. And we need to apply all of those little solutions everywhere and at every place. And if we do this, Nuka, yes, I believe that there is potential to save millions of people. There is potential to prevent lots of suffering in the world, and also save some of the glaciers. So I think it's worth the effort.
That's very hope-giving, David. Thank you so much. And scientists also say that there is still a window of opportunity for more livable and sustainable future. So let us fight for that. This is Euronews Georgia. Thank you for watching.